Pennsylvania wrestling fans, it is late March. This is the final Penn Live Wrestling podcast, I believe, of the 2025-2026 calendar year. But boy, is there a lot to talk about. Just got back from Cleveland, where Penn State put it on the field once again. 4 titleists, ran away with a team title, new record for points. Kale did it again. We got a special guest, Tristan Warner, who has been on the Penn Live Wrestling podcast before. In case you guys forgot, Cumberland Valley great, Old Dominion great, now prominent role at Win Magazine, and we have him on to talk about the wrestling, what he saw, his thoughts on maybe some officiating, but we also want to talk about the upcoming Hodge Trophy, which is going to be announced next week. 7 finalists, 4 Penn State kids. We're going to get Tristan's opinions on that, maybe talk a little bit about the process and kind of how unique this year has been. Jim Carlson is with me. I've already talked too long because we have a ton to get to. Jimmy and Tristan, how you guys doing?
Doing great, Bob. Great tournament. Always NCAA's 3 favorite days of the year. Just a few observations, I guess. The number of people it takes to conduct a tournament of that magnitude is just overwhelming, right? The logistics and schedule down to the second, the concessions, the food prep, the security, people everywhere. It was a well-run event. You see a lot when you're on the ground floor like we were, and one thing that stood out in the hallway was hundreds and hundreds of cases of water, soda, and beer, and one particular stack was sort of tiered. One of the workers was sleeping on a stack of cans. He was just passed out like that. And I guess if you're tired, right? But, Cleveland's a tremendous place. If it could be in Cleveland or Kansas City every year, yeah, I'm all for it. Yep. I tried Vegas as well. I hear there's a move to have it held in Vegas there in the future, so we'll see.
Tristan, I know I saw you out there. Just your thoughts on the tournament. There wasn't, Jimmy, I got to say, there was a lot of beer and liquor, like just surrounding all of not only the wrestling fans but also the wrestling writers. It was. I thought I behaved myself pretty well, but I've never seen that much alcohol. They were just pallets of alcohol. Never seen that much up close. I hope I never see it again because that was a lot to look at.
Yeah, I'll add to Jim's point there. In the finals, we turned around probably about midway through the finals, and the row behind us in the media row was the ESPN crew and people that were working with TV, and there was a guy just head down, asleep on his computer. Hopefully don't get him fired here, but that's kind of how we all felt too. We're just like, man, he's lucky. He must be getting a break right now. But yeah, it was a great event. Long 3 days, especially for people who are working it. I would say, kind of leading into the Penn State topic, I would say when you have a tournament where Penn State does as many insanely remarkable accomplishments as they just did, and it's not the most talked about storyline, it almost felt like, I just wrote my monthly column for Win yesterday, and I even mentioned in there, they set the scoring record for the 3rd year in a row, 6 guys in the finals, 4 champs, and it almost felt like that was overshadowed by some of the other insane storylines that happened. You had, 4 freshman champs, 3 true freshmen. You had, a true freshman who didn't get taken down all year, who beats a returning 2-time champ. You had a true freshman champ who was in high school 3 months ago. Yeah. Just some, you had for the 2nd year in a row, you had a national champ who didn't win a state title in high school, and that happens to be Aiden Valencia, who's also a freshman and was a 10 seed. Unfortunately for Penn State fans there, that came at the hands of Shane Van Ness, but you can't take away what Valencia did. That was an insanely good tournament. So I just think there was so many great storylines that came from that tournament that it's almost like, I don't know if it's a little bit of the Penn State fatigue that the fans out there are kind of just like expecting it at this point, and they're almost over it at this point. But to see what they did is insane, yet it wasn't the most talked about storyline, I feel like.
Yeah, Tristan, I would agree with that. I don't want to. The phrase is "take it for granted," but I mean, man, they just what they do, how they go about their business, and guys, even when they lose, it is by the slimmest, and I mean the slimmest of margins. You look at the 2 finalists who lost; it was they could have just as easily won. You look at Marcus Blaze in the I believe in the semifinals. Just wrestled a
PJ
tough
Duke,
customer.
too.
Did
Yep.
did not. He looked great. If you got, it takes a lot to beat a Penn State wrestler at this time of year. They're so well coached. They're so well prepared. Kale recruits well, but yeah, I do think 177 points last year. We thought, boy, that's gonna last for a little while. What they did, and they. For a while there, I thought they were going to have 200 points. They kind of cooled off a little bit, but that's just because of the competition in the tournament. But 181.5 points, a lot of great matches. Before we get to, at some point, I want to get you guys' take just on the state of wrestling and the officiating. There was some clamoring about maybe some changes that needed to be made. I don't know. I'll leave that to you guys, but I just want to say that, when I think about the Penn State performance, one of my favorite matches of the tournament, even though he didn't win, the way that Shane Van Ness wrestled in this tournament, not only in the finals, I thought, that was a tremendous 149 final, but that match he had against the Oklahoma State kid might have been that might have been the match of the tournament. I didn't get to see them all, but it was just such compelling wrestling. He dug as deep as he could. Just wrestled his ass off. And I give a lot of credit to the kid who beat him because Shane had beaten him, I think, 10-4 in a duel. But we're talking about Shane Van Ness. He was unbeaten coming into this tournament. And, I thought he had a great tournament. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but just your thoughts maybe on some of the individual accomplishments by the Penn State kids.
I guess that's me.
That's you.
Well, Shane, that you're talking about the match with Casey Sudirski.
Yeah.
Where the end takedown there really wasn't a shot. It was just just a flurry where everybody was trying. Each guy was trying to get behind each other, and finally Van Ness got to his legs and literally got the tackle. Tremendous match, and as far as Duke goes, my question for Tristan, PJ Duke, who had the cradle on Landa Robidoux and got the 3 points awarded. Taylor throws the challenge brick and it's overturned. And Tristan, I haven't heard a decent explanation as to why that happened. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I think this leads into a larger discussion, like Bob touched on with the officiating, and I think, and I wrote about this too. I think the officiating, so to speak, is less sure, here and there, there's always one or two officials that make some bad calls. That happens naturally. I think it's a little bit less about, poor officiating versus good officiating. It's more about the current set of rules leaves a lot up for interpretation. And then you're asking a lot from these refs to make these calls when it's very subjective. And so with that PJ Duke match in particular, I think the call was that reaction time. That's the biggest probably thing that people are discussing right now is, he had a takedown for a split second. If you screenshot it and you look at the people posted on Twitter and whatnot of him having Robidoux on his back in a cradle, obviously that looks like a takedown. If you watch it in full speed, it is very quick. So that it's like the ref awarded it too soon, and then the challenge brick comes back and it's, it was probably awarded too fast. Reaction time. So we take it away. But really the problem with that scenario in my mind was that the ref would have been way better off just not calling it at first and just letting that situation play out. Because obviously Duke has a cradle locked up. Is he going to score from there? Is Robidoux, he's like a magician getting out of takedowns sometimes. He very well may have gotten out of it. But I think the biggest, gripe that especially Penn State fans have, and a lot of neutral media members as well, is just that they should have let that situation play out, especially this reaction time that's been implemented. If you're going to roll with it, which I don't know that I agree with it. Sometimes there's so many takedowns that look like it's like if that's not a takedown, then I don't know what is anymore. But in that rare case, they actually called it too quick and then ended up kind of shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. Tristan and Jim, do either one thing I'm glad, Tristan, you said it. Like I don't mean to slight the officials, but it's the process, I think, really that has people a little bit upset. My thing was there was too many matches that were really important that stopped for a long time, whether it was a replay or a brick and then a challenge. And I'm like, I think there was one match that was stopped for like 7 or 8 minutes, and I just wish there was a way to kind of clean that up so they could kind of get on with their business, because the wrestlers are ready to wrestle, and then they're stopped for 5 or 6 minutes. And I just think that there's got to be a way to clean that up. What I did want to do is I wanted to read a couple of social media comments from some very prominent Penn State wrestlers just about the officiating, and I just want to get both of your takes on them real quick. So let me just call those up. Zane Rutherford is first. 2 rule changes I think could improve NCAA wrestling. He said this on Twitter. The challenge system should mirror college and pro football, where calls on the mat stand unless there is clear and irrefutable evidence to overturn them. Number 2, introduce step outs once overtime begins. And then I just want to, so that's one. I'm not trying to put too much on your plate. And then Bo Nickel weighed in and he said, I think it's time for a push out in folk style. I was against this for a long time, but it has become clear this is the way. So those are the comments I just wanted to throw at you guys. Jimmy, if you want to start with it, but I just thought, for wrestlers like that to come out and to kind of not be neutral and advocate for that, I thought maybe we could talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, especially the push out. I mean, Kale said the same thing after the tournament, after Luke Lilledahl's match. He said push out would be good for the program. I think he mentioned earlier that their stalling could have been called earlier than it was. I mean, you just don't. Every official had his own way of calling the stalling. I mean, it was, I don't know. I guess you could call it close to being consistent, but there was certainly some inconsistencies involved. So, I do wish there would be and it's hard though. It's no matter how you look at it, is somebody stalling and what's that referee's opinion of it? And there's I don't think you're going to have clear cut rules on it. And so there are even some about the out of bounds now where you get the immediate warning when you go out of bounds, if if you're backing up or sometimes even get pushed out at times. Some of those I think are too quick. Some of them you just can't help yourself that you're going out of bounds there. Others are legit, but again, I don't see a real way to get around that where it's completely consistent.
Yeah, and just Bo Zane and Bo talked about the force out or the step out. Do you have any strong? Do you think, Jimmy? Do you think would they actually try and do something about it?
I do. I do think if Kale and coaches start talking about it, I do think you could have a push-out rule at least discussed. Put it before the board and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion. It's been talked a little bit about over the years, and I think, like you guys said, Kale finally publicly came out and even said, like, it's about time. And I think that's obviously conducive to the way Penn State wrestles. Like, they're always going forward and pushing people around the mat and trying to force people to wrestle. So obviously it would work out in their favor. I don't know that I have an opinion one way or the other. I mean, personally, when I wrestled freestyle, I didn't like the rule. But I was also not the most aggressive forward-going wrestler. I was more defensive and, scrambles and stuff like that. I do think it's an interesting discussion, though, just because I think the way that they call stalling now is just, it's so subjective. They've tried to make it more objective with the whole, if you're going backwards out of bounds kind of thing, which you used to be able to do. But even that, there's always subjectivity with that. You see the ref do the rolling hand signal, like, action, but then the whole crowd boos so it's really a great topic of discussion. I'm not really entirely sure what can make stalling be more objective, because it really is a subjective call at its core.
Yeah. Let's get to another topic here on the Penn Live Wrestling Podcast. Tristan Warner, Jim Carlson, Bob Flounders just got back from Cleveland, where Penn State put on a show again. Oklahoma State also kind of put on a show a little bit too. David Taylor, the ex-Lion great, Olympic gold medalist, Kale protege, has done a really great job, I think, at Oklahoma State, stabilizing that program, getting it back to prominence. It's a very proud program. They had some national champs. They have some young champs too. Some young, really, really, really talented champs. One storyline that I think everyone was talking about almost from the minute this year's championships ended is, what will it look like between Penn State and Oklahoma State next year with all these young Cowboys, and how soon to maybe Oklahoma State really, really, really closes the gap on Cale's Lions, or don't they close it?
Well, I mean, you can't help but think David Taylor, with the way he's recruiting, is building something rather quickly. You know, the 4 finalists, as we said, were freshmen. Ladarian Lockett, another freshman, doesn't place.
Yeah.
You know, heavyweight Deshaun Ross coming in along with the Rainey brothers. You know, let's face it, Taylor's mentor was Cale Sanderson, and there are many similarities surfacing in the way Okie State is operating. There are some differences too, but you know Okie State wants to get back to the Okie State of old, and it's been a while since they've been relevant. So their fans are just, frothing. Tristan, what's your impression of what's going on with the Stilley boys?
Yeah, very, very similar to what you said, Jim. I mean, he's doing an incredible job recruiting right now and developing too, just because some of those true freshman guys like Sergio Vega, for example, I was at the Ironman last December and he lost in the semis. He got beat by Seth Mendoza, who's now a redshirt at Missouri. But, when Vega came out of high school, he was our Wins Junior Chalice Award winner for having, being the best pinner in high school wrestling. But, he was obviously a very high recruit, but he wasn't somebody that necessarily was destined to come out of college and win a national title as a true freshman. So you have to give a lot of credit to not only just their recruiting, but also their development. These guys are, same with Robidou, like when he came out, stud recruit, but I don't think a lot of people had him penciled in to beat Antrell Taylor, to beat PJ Duke, to win the national title. So incredible job that they're doing. I think, Drayshawn Ross coming in next year, most likely going to start at heavyweight, could be very easily a title contender at that weight right away. A lot of those top heavyweights graduated. And honestly, they have a little bit of a problem in the light / middleweights with just how many stud recruits they have and young guys that are in quite a bit of a logjam. I'm sure they'll find a way to manipulate, with red shirts. And then, next year there will be a possibility for Olympic red shirts for some of these guys. But, if you look at the volume of the recruits they're getting and kind of what weights they seem to be trickling into, like from 33 to 57, 65-ish, there's a lot of talent there in that Oklahoma State room. So it'll be very interesting to see how they navigate that lineup. But I think to catch Penn State or to even to come close, that 74 through 97 is where they're going to have to, find or develop, a guy like Facundo, who's obviously top tier, but didn't get a job done, didn't place. Zach Ryder got 8th as a freshman, which is really impressive, but has had a lot of shoulder issues. So, if he can get healthy, but he's got to still close the gap on somebody like Rocco. So I think that's where the big question lies for them.
Yeah, Tristan and Jim, let's get to, speaking of log jams and talent and recruiting, let's get to just an early look, your thoughts on what next season's Penn State team could possibly look like, because I think there's a lot of variables. Penn State had a really good wrestler redshirt this year in Kasak, and he's coming back, and he's gonna be a force. They have a couple of guys that are ready to break into that lineup, and other than Levi Haines, they're not missing much. So guys, just have at it. What do you just both of your takes on what it potentially could look like for Penn State to start next year, and what are the compelling weights where maybe there's a little bit of uncertainty?
Well, this is like the AP football rankings the day after the national championship game, when you're already ranking next year's, and you want to do it, and it's interesting. We're not going to know till the beginning of November, but I think clearly Luke Lilledahl, he said he wants to own 125 for the next couple of years. I think he can hold the weight. The question is first question is 133, whether Marcus Blaze stays at 133, red shirts, or moves to 41. You have Maso Ono in the program, Japanese national champion, who's not wrestled folk style, but is clearly, Japanese world champion, freestyle. So everyone wants to see him. Braden Davis, does he stay around or does he enter the portal? Does Blaze move up to 41? 49, Shane Van Ness most likely will return. He can. I would assume he will. Then the next three, what happens? Tyler Kasek comes back. He's been holding that weight in freestyle around that weight, so I assume he's at 57. Does does Mitchell Mesenbrink move up and to 174? Can that body handle that? I think it can. Does he want to? That's another matter. Kale never forces guys to go up or down. So if Mesenbrink doesn't go up, what happens to PJ Duke? Does he redshirt? And if Mesenbrink does, then you have Kasek, Duke, and Mesenbrink, which is an incredible run there, right? Or then you have, and if you don't, it's what Joe. See, I'm missing one. Not Joe Seeley. Help me out.
Will Henkel's in there.
William Henkel.
Henkel. That's what I wasn't thinking of.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, and a possibility at 74, right? Rock goes back at 84. Barr's back at 97, and Mirasola. You want him to put some weight on. He had trouble doing that this year. He was all around 226, 228 the whole season. Plus, the Bell Vernon recruit who's coming in is around. He wrestled at 213 or 215, so he's got to put some weight on too.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went a little long there, but Tristan, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I agree with everything you said. Nate Desmond is another one who's been a really impressive freshman for them, who could be at 41, depending on, if say Blaze redshirts, then Ono goes 33, then, Desmond's in there. From what I've been hearing, I don't think Mesenbrink is going to go up, but, I've heard that Kasak's looking pretty big. 74 for Kasak sounds kind of ridiculous in my mind, but from what I've been hearing, he's looking pretty big, and he went from 41 to 57 before, so who knows? But like you said, Jim, the best way to summarize it is they've got an embarrassment of riches. You got one you didn't even mention was Asher Cunningham, who,
Right.
At the Southern Scuffle, when he won that, I think the match was like 12-11 over that American kid Campos at the time.
Right.
It was, it's impressive for him to win the Scuffle as a freshman, but at the time it's like, I don't really know who this American kid is. Well, that kid just got fourth at NCAA's. So again, embarrassment of riches. I'm sure they'll find a way to sort it out. It's more, you feel bad for the guys that don't find a way into the lineup, which there will be plenty of those as well. But like I said, hopefully between red shirts and then Olympic red shirts next year, they'll be able to preserve as much eligibility for these guys as possible.
We are here with Tristan Warner of Win Magazine. That is my way of setting this next segment up here on the podcast. The Hodge Trophy, prestigious award, doesn't get any better on at the wrestling level, Division I level. I almost feel bad that we didn't really talk about Mitchell Mesenbrink on this podcast till just about 60 seconds ago, because he was phenomenal. Not only in the tournament, but just the entire season. You guys have been around wrestling more than I have. His talent, what he did all year, most outstanding wrestler at the tournament. I think most dominant wrestler for the season. Hasn't lost in 2 years. I think he's only lost once in his collegiate career, and it was to Carr in the finals. What? Just before we get to the Hodge voting and Tristan, kind of what that process looks like, maybe you can just explain it to the fans how that's going to come about, because I think there's some salty Penn State fans. Over time, I think even Kale said it. He thought they should have had some more, but it might not be up to. That's not necessarily how that works. But Mitchell Mesenbrink, to me, the ability, the talent, the personality, he's a very outgoing guy. Burgeoning singing career. Who knows? Maybe he shouldn't do that. I don't know. He needs to get a little bit better. He's a little bit better wrestler at this point. But just your thoughts on him as we lead into a discussion just on the Hodge Trophy and also all the great wrestlers that are up for the award. Tristan, why don't you start?
Yeah, his season was really impressive. I think he finished 27-0 with 26 bonus point wins. I think his only match that went the full distance was the quarterfinal win over Hepner from North Carolina, which that's a really strong kid who's good at scrambling. But more than anything, that match was just weird. For those who didn't see it, midway through the second period, the kid got a stinger, I think he did, and then they brought out a stretcher, and there was a 10-minute stoppage. So I think the whole flow of that match just got thrown off. And Mesenbrink is one of those guys that he just wears you out because he just doesn't stop shooting. So, not to make an excuse for Hepner, who wrestled wrestled him as tough as anybody could all year. But that was a bizarre circumstance. But he really came very close to being, I think, the first wrestler ever to go 100% bonus. He would have been. But either way, I think putting the exclamation point on it was the way he tech falled Caliendo in the finals to beat a guy of that caliber 9 times. And, usually each time you wrestle a guy who's that good, it gets closer. He finds ways to narrow the gap. I mean, even if you look at Kale's career with John Trenge there at the end, like Trenge found ways to, I think it was like 6-1 in the finals, like found ways to kind of slow him down a little bit. But Cali, he tech falls Caliendo and just put an exclamation point on it. So, I'd have to say, I don't obviously know any of the votes or anything yet.
Yeah.
The fan vote just went live Monday. So fans can go on winmagazine.com, all the way up until Friday at 5 p.m. Central and cast their vote. But, in my mind, he's obviously one of the strong front runners. And that also is aided by the fact that Mendez lost, because I know there had been a lot of chatter about Mendez being a prime candidate. So him losing definitely makes it even more so in my mind that Mesenbrink could be taking it home.
So you have to be undefeated, correct?
Yeah. I mean, if there was a year where nobody was undefeated, then obviously they'd have to give it to somebody, I think. But yeah, to my knowledge, you have to be undefeated. There's 7 guys that finished as undefeated champions. Like you said, 4 of those are Penn State guys. And then you got Jax Forrest from Oklahoma State, Sergio Vega from Oklahoma State, and Isaac Trumble from NC State.
Right. It's a shame that Mendez can't be a candidate. 2-time champ, runner-up.
Yeah.
Do you think there could be a groundswell of support for Jax Forrest?
I think there can be, and I think there is to some degree. I've heard some chatter, and you just talk to people at the tournament and stuff. What he did was insanely impressive, obviously. I think maybe the only, and I don't want to say it's a knock on him, but the only thing that could maybe hinder his chances a little bit, aside from just Mesenbrink being out of this world dominant, is that he only wrestled 18 matches. He wrestled half of a season instead of a full season. And if you look at his bout by bout results, which I kind of was in charge of compiling, he didn't have, I think, as many wins against All-Americans in that bracket. He teched Ayala, which was super impressive, and he beat Seidel twice. But I think just naturally having a shorter season, like if he would have been at the National Duels Invitational, Ronnie Ramirez was wrestling for them at 33 at that time. He wrestled, Ayala there. I think he wrestled another guy who ended up placing. So I think he probably would have had a little stronger argument had he had, 30 matches or 28 and, wrestled a handful more of NCAA All-American caliber guys.
Do you think, votes for Lilledahl, Haines, and Barr can take away from Mesenbrink's probable favorites role as well?
Naturally, yeah, I think that's one of Kale's, I think, been kind of his vocal complaints is that with the whole voting process is that Penn State annually has multiple guys up for the award, and naturally, if you only get one vote and you pick one of the Penn State guys as opposed to the other, then that kind of crowds or segments their votes, as opposed to if you're an NC State fan right now, you're voting for Isaac Trumble. You know what I mean? So in theory at least. So yeah, it's possible. I think that's why it makes it interesting, and we'll see what happens. But I would have to think most Penn State fans that are knowing you only get one vote at this.
Yeah.
You're probably looking at all of them. Barr's season was insanely dominant as well. I just think the only, he's a younger guy, and I think his weight was a little bit, I don't want to say any of the weights are weak because the weights are all tough, but his weight lacked some of the huge names that, the Tech Fall Caliendo, as opposed to the decision Cody Merrill. Merrill's a stud freshman as well, but he doesn't have quite the resume yet that Caliendo does, for example.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Mikey Caliendo will vote for Mesenbrink, but
Well, there was no handshake at the podium, so I don't know that he's got. I don't know that he's got his vote. Before we wrap up this Penn Live Wrestling podcast, and I want to thank Tristan Warner for coming on for the second year in a row. Win Magazine, Hodge Trophy, 7 really, really good wrestlers. There can only be one winner. It'll be announced not this coming Tuesday, because we're recording this on Wednesday. So in 6 days, early next week on Tuesday.
Yep.
I think a lot of people are going to be really curious to see how it plays out. Before I let you guys go, I wanted to ask both of you just for your thoughts on Levi Haines. His career the senior that has moved on. I know Cale has talked about him. You can tell the way that Cale talks about him that he means a little bit more maybe than some of the greats that Cale has coached. Lehigh is an unassuming guy, not a big talker, devastating on the mat, very, very good in freestyle. Just your thoughts on what he has been able to accomplish. Kind of a little bit of a trendsetter in that he did not finish his, much like Jax, he didn't really, I think, finish his career at Big Liverpool. I also think he might have been like 106 or something when he won his first, or he was very, very small when he won his first PIAA title. Both of you, just your thoughts on Levi, what it was like watching him, what you like most about him, and what you think he meant not only to Penn State wrestling, but also to Cale.
Well, clearly it means a lot to Cale. Cale definitely wants to keep him around in the club, and I'm sure he's going to stay. But just from watching him as a freshman and just his strength, and then that just kept getting better and better. And then his technique, just the technique from what jumps he made in freestyle to becoming a world champion. The technique wasn't there early on as far as, the talent was there, but technique and is so important. And so, but the main thing that Cale will miss, but he'll still be around in a room, is his leadership role. And even though it wasn't all that outgoing, just a nice guy, someone everybody would look up to, and he would lead by example. And so there are a lot of guys in the lineup like that, but he just stood out to me in that respect.
Yeah, I would say, growing up wrestling in high school at Cumberland Valley, Dave Heckard was my head coach, and Heckard actually lost in the state finals one year to Ken Haines, which is Levi's dad. And he always talked about how that guy was the strongest guy he ever wrestled. And, it was no surprise to me when I moved back home from ODU, was right around the time Levi was coming up through like middle school and high school. And I'd always just hear about not only how good this kid is, but how strong he is. And the light bulb went off, the connection was like, well, that makes sense. And that's not to take anything away from him. I'm sure he, lifts and wrestles so hard, but genetically, I think he's so strong. And that is evident by the way that he was able to, couple things actually, by the way he was able to go from 57 to 74 and actually got better. That's one. Most guys don't skip a weight and go up and get better, but also probably the single most impressive thing about Levi to me is how young he is. So many of these guys you see now are like 19 in high school, or they graduate college and they're 26 and they're on their 7th year of eligibility or whatever. This kid is 21 years old. He just said it in his interview the other day. He was in the NCAA finals as a true freshman at 18 years old. It's truly amazing to me that to have that, the physical and mental maturity at that young of an age to have done so much that he's done. And also just to be such a, I'm old school personally, but such a humble, quiet. He's not a showboat or anything like that. He just he's, I guess what you would say, if I'm raising my 3-year-old boys and taking them to a wrestling match, like Levi is who I want them to be. You know what I mean? So, he's going to be missed and he's going to be talked about for a long time.
And just one more question for Tristan, Bob. Yep. Tristan, clearly big name high school in Cumberland Valley, wrestling for ODU and all. You've been in the tournament. Can you say, is wrestling in the NCAA tournament one of the best experiences, at least athletically, that you've ever had?
From a results standpoint, it didn't go the way I planned any of the times I was there. So it wasn't the most joyous occasion, but I would say just to be able to have been on the floor and have wrestling shoes on, that's what I always say. I was going to the NCAA since the time I was about 6 or 7 years old as a fan. And, just dreaming about going to step on a mat down there with wrestling shoes on someday was almost maybe too big of a goal, because by the time I got there, I think it was almost made it bigger of a deal in my mind than it was. But just to have been a part of it is insane. It's a special thing that I'll never forget. Just the process of being with your team through that, going to battle at the NCAAs is just an incredible accomplishment. So, or not accomplishment, but experience, I should say. Yeah. So it was a blast, and it was by far, even in an outing when I didn't get what I wanted, it was still probably my most cherished wrestling experience for sure.
Guys, we made it all the way to late March. It's been a really, really rewarding year, I think, watching college wrestling just not just Penn State wrestling, but all the Pennsylvania wrestlers who did just an outstanding job in college. Not just at Penn State. I think Jimmy said there were close to 50 or maybe 50 exactly in the NCAA tournament, which speaks volumes about just kind of what Pennsylvania wrestling is about. It was an exciting year. Cale Sanderson and the Penn State Nittany Lions, they did it again. I think, Jimmy, they will start next year with an 86 match winning streak, and I don't know that that's going to go away anytime soon. They're headed for, I think, triple figures, if I'm not mistaken. But Tristan Warner of Win Magazine, everyone, please keep an eye out and please vote on the Hodge Trophy. 7 very deserving finalists. Oklahoma State had a great year. Hopefully Oklahoma State, Nebraska, and Ohio State can continue to push Penn State, but they still have a lot of ground to make up if they want to get to where Penn State is at. I just want to say anyone who listened or watched the podcast this year, we really appreciate it. Before I say goodbye to everyone, Jimmy or Tristan, any final thoughts?
Tristan?
Like you said, the Hodge will be announced next Tuesday on Flow Wrestling Radio Live, so at 12 p.m. Central. So anybody can tune in there to find out who wins, and then we will present it at the whatever wrestler wins that team's banquet, which I think they're all somewhere in April. And then typically, either Brian and I will get to present it to them at a football game in the fall, which is really cool too. So, keep your eye out for the Hodge announcement.
All right, Jimmy, final thoughts. Don't blow it.
All right. I'm still coming down off that 3 days in Cleveland. Again, it's just a great experience. And as Tristan was saying, and just watching, all the talent, the emotion. I wrote a column once, it was quite a while ago, from the Giant Center, from the PWAs, and just what I saw in the tunnels. And, from jubilation to high fives to kids, in the fetal position, laying on the floor after they lost, and I saw some of that in the halls at Cleveland. I saw flat out tears, guys with head in their hands. And it's just a tough sport that you invest, your emotions, your life into. And only 10 guys walk away with what they really wanted. And it's such a great sport.
Yeah, well said, Jimmy. Couldn't agree more. That's it for this final edition of the Penn Live Wrestling Podcast. Thanks to Tristan Warner. Don't forget about the Hodge. It's coming up. We'll see if Tristan's going to have to drive to State College for a wrestling banquet and a football game, or maybe he'll be headed out west. But whoever wins it certainly earned it this year.
Yep. Thanks, guys.